Hello, I'm Floyd Stokes, your instructor for AJ3, Introduction to Corrections at College of the Redwoods. These series of PowerPoint videos are meant to give you an audio-visual overview of each chapter of the text, but you will still need to thoroughly read each chapter. Today I want to discuss Chapter 2 of our text, which is titled, Why Do We Punish? This chapter has 6 learning objectives. 1. Name and describe the 5 primary punishment philosophies. 2. List and summarize the 3 key elements for effective deterrence. 3. Compare and contrast selective and general incapacitation. 4. Summarize rehabilitation's development from a reclamation focus to a reentry emphasis. 5. Explain the key ways in which retribution differs from revenge. And 6. Describe how restorative justice principles are used in sentencing, during community supervision, and in prison. Well, let's get started. The 5 primary punishment philosophies are deterrence, incapacitation, rehabilitation, retribution, and restoration. The aim of deterrence is to use punishment to discourage future criminal acts. When punishment is applied to someone who has misbehaved, it is acting as a specific deterrence to discourage that person from offending again. When the aim of punishment is to discourage other people from committing a crime in the first place, it is said to have a general deterrence function. In order for punishment of one offender to have a deterrent effect on others, the others must believe that the punishment will be more painful than any pleasure they get from the act, and that punishment will be swift, severe, certain, and public. When incapacitation is used as a punishment, a person's ability to move about freely is impaired or restricted. Historically, incapacitation of criminals has been achieved through imprisonment. The idea that is removing a criminal from free society, when you do this, that person is prevented from continuing to cause harm to people or property. Most people agree that prison is necessary for some criminals. Where we disagree is about the size of that some category. Some would reserve imprisonment for those few offenders who must truly be locked away, known as selective incapacitation, and others see it as a lock-'em-all-up approach, which is known as general incapacitation. This approach has certainly been instrumental in filling our prisons beyond capacity. And don't make any mistake about it, our prisons, especially here in California, are filled beyond capacity. There is another means of incapacitation that has resulted from recent advances in technology. This is referred to as technological incapacitation, and it includes chemical intervention or treatment, including chemical castration, critical organ surgery, including operating on violence regions of the brain, or the removal of both testicles, that's exciting, or electronic monitoring, including ankle bracelets and the newer GPS monitors that inform authorities of the offender's location and/or movements. The idea of punishment for the purposes of rehabilitation is possibly the newest of the 5 punishment rationales. This newcomer has a lengthy history, from the Quakers' desire to reclaim the offender's soul to the contemporary version of rehabilitation as a way to reintegrate the offender back into society. This version is likely linked to what is called the iron law of imprisonment, which is that almost all prisoners come back one day to live in a free society. That is, all except those who die in prison. Contemporary rehabilitation seems less treatment-based and more reentry-based. The need for this emphasis on rehabilitation as reentry becomes apparent upon seeing statistics showing that prisoners today are ill-prepared for life on the outside. Even as the realization that inmates must be prepared for post-incarceration gathers momentum, there remains the feeling that offenders must also be punished for having committed a crime in the first place. And that brings us to the punishment philosophy called retribution. Retribution is sometimes mistakenly assumed to be the same as revenge. The two concepts, though related, are actually different in several key ways. Those who believe in retribution do not care if criminals or others are deterred, if society is safer while the criminal is locked up, or whether offenders are rehabilitated. Their concern is simply that society carries out its moral obligation to punish people who commit a crime, and to match the punishment to the crime. This falls under the principle of lex talionis, or the law of retaliation. In other words, an eye for an eye, and so on. This principle is illustrated in the Bible, and it is also stated in the Quran. And as for the man who steals and the woman who steals, to quote from the Quran, cut off their hands as a punishment for what they have earned, quote unquote. This goal of having a punishment equivalent to the crime is infrequently found in U.S. jurisdictions today. The death penalty for homicide is the best example, but more often retribution seeks proportional rather than equivalent punishment. The focus of punishment philosophies thus far has been on either the offender, in the form of rehabilitation, or the crime, in the form of deterrence, incapacitation, or retribution. Increasingly in U.S. jurisdictions, calls are made for a penal philosophy that considers the harm done to the victim when deciding the appropriate punishment for the offender. Restoration is a punishment rationale that attempts to make the victim and the community whole again by restoring things as much as possible to how they were before the crime was committed. This return to equilibrium provides a link between retribution and restoration because each philosophy is based on the norm of reciprocity, wherein punishment is a natural response or reciprocation to a wrongful act. There is increasing indication that a penal philosophy of restoration will take a prominent role in the 21st century. That label is attached to this philosophy is known as restorative justice or community justice. Restorative justice principles are used today for sentencing during community supervision of the offender and even in prison. They encompass an approach referred to as victim-offender mediation. This approach would be the sentencing circle based on the customs of Native American tribal peacemaking, where a circle is formed, including the offender, the victim, families, friends, co-workers, social service personnel, and interested community members would participate. Judges and prosecutors could also be involved. The groups discuss the event and eventually come to an agreement regarding the best resolution. The sentence, quote unquote, is either accepted within the group or recommended to the judge at the next court appearance. Restorative practices include post-conviction reparative probation programs, victim-offender mediation, community reparation boards, citizen circles during parole after the offender is released, or victim impact classes in prison while the offender is still incarcerated. Criticism of the restorative justice philosophy would include the belief that it is too lenient or that it may unfairly perpetuate existing social inequities for disadvantaged, weaker, or less influential victims who may just accept too little in the hope of obtaining agreement and being left alone. Despite those concerns, restorative justice has its proponents and has been shown to have positive outcomes. Also, its ability to incorporate aspects of retribution and rehabilitation suggests to some that the restorative philosophy may foretell the 21st century's response to the question, why do we punish? Well, to summarize this chapter, The 5 punishment philosophies are deterrence, incapacitation, rehabilitation, retribution, and restoration. In order for punishment to be a deterrent, it must be certain, severe, and swiftly applied. Selective incapacitation relies on the characteristics of the criminal. General incapacitation relies on the characteristics of the crime itself. Rehabilitation is a legitimate penal philosophy requiring a formal penal sanction, equity, and just deserts. Revenge is not considered a legal penal philosophy. Restorative justice can occur at any phase in the criminal justice system and has the goal of trying to make everything, quote, whole again, unquote. Before I close, be sure to read page 29 of the text that discusses Charles Manson and the troublesome issue of cell phones, and now smartphones, of course, in prisons. We'll discuss this issue further in class. Well, that's it for now. We'll see you in class.